This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufahl. Joined, I said this because all of a sudden we're trying some different software. So I'm joined fully virtually today by Michael Grande and Steve Maresca. We're always in studio, so this is going to be a different dynamic.
Hey there.
I like saying studio because it sounds so official, and now all of a sudden, we're home and we're giving it a shot this way. So, and we've asked Dan Fox today, the co-founder of ControlMap, to join us. Dan, it's a pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Vancord's been using ControlMap now for I want to say 18 months ish. And in that time frame, we had the honor of being one of the three ControlMap partner finalists of the year. We ultimately did not win official partner of the year, but I think I don't know all the criteria. I think if we knew it ahead of time, maybe we could have pushed harder. But we've really come to a place where we rely on the platform. In particular, I think, Steve, for the delivery of what you do on a day-to-day basis, which is sort of monitoring and managing, security posture and sort of regulatory compliance for clients, among a variety of other things. So, Dan, knowing how much we use it, but maybe not everybody that's on the podcast is familiar with it. Let's spend a few minutes on, what is ControlMap? What's your positioning kind of in the industry, in comparison to some of the other, sort of GRC tools that are out there?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a specialized GRC tool. Really, we were built to help you through your compliance journey. We started off with SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and focused on those around 2020 is when we got off the ground and expanded to now 60 different frameworks. So we are very framework focused, I would say, but we also have become, over the last couple of years, focused on working through partners and making sure that we can deliver what you need for your customers. So we've ended up going down a couple different journeys that way. What used to be, hey, let's just work on collecting evidence and automating that the best we can for a third-party audit, has now moved into sometimes you're going to be using an assessment. Sometimes you're just looking to present up the risks to your customer. Sometimes you're just looking to create a holistic plan and not go through a third-party audit. And other times you are trying to go through a third-party audit. So there's these different use cases that we've started building toward, if you will, over the last couple of years that started with this one journey and then, has been guided by all of your customers, actually, in a way.
And I think it's fair to say we have customers all in each of those example cases that you just went through. Some just want to self-assess. Others are very actively pursuing their own SOC 2 or ISO 27001 formalized, very business-focused, revenue-generating, customer reassuring outcomes. So we enjoy working with all of the various corners of the platform. I think our customers do too.
I think we're still quite early in this journey as well. I mean, when you look at where we are in time, all of us here, we work on it every day. We feel like we've probably been in the trenches for a long time. But when you pull back and you look at the timeline here, really a lot of these security conferences, these security frameworks have just launched in the last 5 years, some of them in the last 3 years. And so we're very early on in trying to tackle the risks that have come up from living in a digital age over this last decade. And everything's kind of a slow response, if you will, over the years. And so I feel like we're just kind of coming into a new space where we're all starting to understand it. We're all speaking the same language and trying to get behind, basically reducing risk for organizations using best practices like frameworks.
So you teed up my question, which is nice. You give me a sense, how many frameworks do you support? And part of that, because a bunch of them are new, one of the capabilities that you bring to the table is the ability to, you're mapping all these frameworks in the back end, and when a customer or when somebody needs to adhere to a new framework or standard, a lot of the pre-existing answers to questions they've done, import into those new frameworks and can save a bunch of time in terms of, adopting something that all of a sudden they feel like they have to be compliant with. So I don't remember the number, but it's got to be, you must have, 30 or 40 different standards and frameworks at least in the platform today.
Yeah, there's over 40 different unique ones. We have over 60 total, but some of those are different flavors, if you will, like NIST, for instance, NIST CSF 1.1 and 2.0. We support both of those. So in that sense, there is a little bit of duplication, but that's because when you move from one to another, there's actually a kind of a time lapse. You can continue today actually to use NIST CSF 1.1, and it won't phase out for a couple more years. But yeah, it's grown to over 60, and I don't think we're anywhere near done. I think over the coming years, it's probably going to approach 100 because each one focuses on a specific industry, and each one focuses on a specific region. Think of the different laws, think of different countries. And so there's a lot out there. It's a global response. This isn't localized to just the US. This has been a global response effort to reduce risk. The estimate is like it's a $10 trillion problem that we're tackling with cybersecurity risk globally. To give you put that in perspective, the GDP of Germany is 4.5 trillion.
Yeah.
We're talking two Germanys. We're talking two Japans. I mean, it's a lot.
So you've got privacy frameworks in there. You've got sort of your more traditional security frameworks. I don't know the answer to this. We didn't discuss it ahead of time. I'm curious. Is there a framework or two or that you see as just most commonly used across all industries, or anything that really bubbles up to the top?
Yeah, in our world, that would be CIS and NIST CSF are the two generalist frameworks, I would say, and then you get into the industry-specific ones from there. So if you're working with anybody with public funding right now, so we see a good example, airports, water authorities, power companies, anybody with public funding will come through NIST CSF. Anybody outside of that public funding arena would go through CIS as a generalist framework. Those are being recognized by cyber insurance to provide discounts or just actually, basically be able to ensure that you're meeting their standards. And from there, you get into kind of the specialist ones, which I think you work on too, right? CMMC has
Right.
really been a huge uplift. A little bit shaken with the Trump administration coming in, but we'll see how that plays out this year. That one could be an interesting topic.
Yeah, heaven forbid, though, CMMC doesn't have some sort of question marks associated with it at all times, right?
Right.
for way too long.
And we thought we were done with that, but I guess not.
Dan, are there sort of use cases or where ControlMap can be used outside of direct compliance activities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, overall, just reducing risk and basically following best practices. We do like to focus on a framework. The reason why is because you reduce the risk from following your own best practice, your own good ideas, if you will. Like, hey, we've got a great idea. We've got, custom framework that we want to use. When you use a framework that's established, you've shifted the risk off your shoulders to this best practice. And that's seen also from liability inbound. If a breach occurs, now the whole point of this is to reduce the risk of breach. But if, let's say, a breach does occur, you can say, look, I followed all these best practices. Here's all the work we did. That actually does reduce the remediation risk and litigation risk for yourself and your customers on that breach. So that's why we think working with a framework is always a good idea. And that is outside of the world of compliance. That is just a good idea. Those are just best practices, right?
In this regard, we have multiple customers that we're working with, or they are working independently using your risk register capabilities. And just from a generalized risk management as a discipline, it's extremely helpful to help frame those conversations. Risk management is one of those things that requires translating something from subject matter experts to departments that don't really understand they're calling the shots in terms of business risk acceptance. So structurally, even if we're not talking about compliance, it's a big help in that realm, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Have you had a challenge, Steve or Michael or Jason? Have you had a challenge of translating that for customers, or would they prefer to just not know? They think, okay, if I just don't know, my risk is reduced, or
I,
what do you
I think it's
what do you see
incumbent
there?
on us to say, head in the sand is not a sound approach to risk management. No, we haven't had a major challenge there. I think, especially in the risk register elements, they're very common sense type business revenue focused, health safety focused framing in terms of impact analysis. That is extraordinarily helpful. It makes it far more tangible compared to some of the more esoteric language attached to framework controls. Those require more translation, but in risks in particular, no, it's much more in reach for many folks.
That is good to hear. I do think the education has gone up over the last few years, partially because of breach news. I mean, we're seeing big breaches every month, something that people are talking about. I think breach of the year last year was maybe United Health, maybe, I don't know, arguable. There was a few. The automotive industry was hit by the auto dealership. I can't think of the name of that company. That basically was the supply chain of the entire automotive industry for managing inventory of all parts and inventory of all cars, and then they had a breach and it kind of impacted that whole industry for over the whole summer, actually. So yeah, I mean, those do tend to educate folks because they make the headlines, not just in our tech world, but in the Wall Street Journal world, and it kind of can translate for the executives that are trying to make these decisions out there.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we've seen sort of a maturation from clients where they understand that it's worth you're tracking risk, tracking at least their security strategy against a framework, even if they're not, maybe mandated or compelled to do that. There is a why behind it. Some clients feel like, said, I'll get a break on cyber liability insurance if I can at least demonstrate I'm doing the right things. And that's a positive. But certainly most, I would say, and Steve, keep me honest here, but most are probably looking at it because they have to. CMMC is driving them towards it. Maybe or maybe they've got some clients that are asking them questions and they want to adhere to like a framework like SOC 2 or something.
Yeah, that aspect in particular is a big driver, even if the organization is not compelled in some sort of regulatory sense. Simply business drivers. How can we enter into markets that are more highly regulated? How can we reassure third parties that we're doing the right thing? Those are all intrinsically beneficial to, putting on a good face, demonstrating competence. And there are absolutely components in ControlMap that assist that. And Dan, please elaborate, but I'm thinking of the trust elements. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the goal, is to take these, 100 or so best practices that each of these frameworks touch, and they touch everything. They don't just touch technology, right? They touch technology, they touch people, they touch governance, and then basically put it into something that's easy to manage and consumable. Integrations are one piece where we can look across, hooking into, let's say, Azure or AWS, and look across all the assets. And you have hundreds of assets, and how am I supposed to manage all this and know, do I have my root account locked down? Do I have my encryption enabled? Like, when you can just hook in and just, you have an API that tells you, here you go. That just saves a lot of time. That's the goal, where we're building for, and what we've been designed for years and continue to build on. So yeah, that's what we want to do, is make this easier for everybody, to reach these best practices, and stay secure is ultimately the end goal. But you're right, there's still the business drivers there to meet these objectives. That's what's really pushing people toward it in the first place. It hasn't really changed in the last several years.
So Dan, you touched on early on, maybe a little bit of uncertainty with, well, we talked CMMC at that time with new administration, but maybe sort of more holistically, GRC as a whole, looking forward, looking down the road. Do you see any monumental changes coming? Do you see more refinement? And then, one of the hottest topics. It's constant. It seems ubiquitous, right? Is AI and integration into all things. Maybe if you wanted to share your thoughts on that and how it relates to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI is a game changer for all industries, and it's a game changer also for security. Cisco was already talking about AI-based patching that they released about I think Q3, and they're just kind of refining that. That's a really cool concept where it's looking across now all of your actual vulnerabilities and then trying to automate the patching on that. So you'll see that in the coming year. Same with GRC. So what we're looking at is using AI to connect the dots between the tech that you're using, the risks that are out there, and actually giving you a clearer picture and mapping that into these best practices. So it's kind of a 3-step process there. All 3 of these need to connect. We've done that through some manual mappings, and we have nice frameworks like SCF that sort of connects the dots across thousands of these things that helps us. But there's enough data there that AI sitting on top of that can provide a lot of value and insights and guidance, and ideally save time for Vancord, save time for your clients, and be able to get to that executive summary faster. Like, here is the real, the real kind of gold here in all the dirt. Like, what do we really need to focus on? Because we only have so much bandwidth. We can't tackle it all the time. So that's, I think, where AI is going to be enormous for us, and we're building toward that. Right now, we've got great foundations for it and are layering that in. So you'll see that coming out in the coming quarters, which is exciting.
I'm surprised you want to put effort into streamlining, answering all those questions. I find everybody loves to spend multiple hours answering question after question. So that's a real loss for us.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure everyone will be so bummed out about that.
They would. I mean, 110 from CMMC, you do that in one session, and that's a fun day.
Right. Well, you still need to. I mean, AI is not going to take that 100% off the table. You still do need to assess yourself.
What
right?
luck.
Right.
The real work is in the doing and in the proving.
That does become like the foundation that you need to have. You have to have somewhere to level set. Otherwise, you're just taking it from thin air. That's
it's chaos, right?
Yeah.
So we keep talking ControlMap. You're on video here. You've got your ScalePad shirt on. So ControlMap was acquired by ScalePad. There's a lot of we use ScalePad products as well as ControlMap. What integration can we look forward to? In the over the next year, for example, and in what ways do you see that benefiting those customers like us that have multiple products of yours?
Yeah, so one of the key reasons we joined in to the ScalePad umbrella was because ScalePad hooks into just about all the tools that are used in the MSP and the tech community, primarily the RMMs, the PSAs, remote management and monitoring, which is the tools that are remotely managing endpoints and servers and systems. They have the APIs hooked into 50 different systems. So we're able to use that almost like an API aggregator. We did build into that last year, and so that you're already able to use today, which is awesome. The next level is being able to then talk with that data back and forth. So take something like a risk and say, okay, I want to put it into my business plan and say, this is the 5 things I want to focus on next year or next quarter. Make it part of your QBR, your quarterly business review, and say, here's the basic cost. Here's what we think we should be doing. Here's the menu of the other items we could do, but here's why this is number 1 and number 2 and number 3. And this is what we want to present to you, customer, to work on next quarter. And that's the next piece that we're getting into. And then we are also opening up our API for other folks to talk into us. So we have, for instance, insurance underwriters want to be able to pull in our data to be able to, if you wanted to sign up for cyber insurance for yourself and for your customer and just do it with a click of a button and say, I feel confident in where I'm standing. I just want to be able to submit this. And the underwriter goes, sure, here, we're going to pull it over. So that's coming this year as well, which is pretty cool.
I work with many carriers and brokers, so I'm confident that will be a topic of interest as soon as it's available. Let's put it that way.
Same thing, right? Those come with questionnaires. You're just basically re-answering
Right.
the same data
Oh,
is what you're doing.
yes, it's agonizing at times. Anything that makes that easier, everyone will be happy.
Yeah, and behind the scenes, those carriers are starting to align to things like CIS. And so
Absolutely.
all we need is that one mapping. If you can kind of connect those dots, if you have this 50 questions from the insurance carrier and they have each of those tied to CIS on the back end. Now we have your CIS or whatever you use, maybe you use NIST CSF, but we have NIST CSF mapped to CIS.
Right.
So now you can see how you can pull this all in. Oh, everyone wins. We all just
Right.
have a huge load off.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we didn't touch on it a lot, right? We've really focused a bit on answering questions and sort of developing the roadmap that you to address the gaps that you identify and all of that. But part of this is you are pulling in all of the evidence, and so you get to see what policies you've written that align to specific control questions or standards questions. You get a better understanding of how you're managing your vendors throughout this single application. So we're using it essentially as that sort of single source of truth for all the things that we do on the security side, and we're starting to see that move by clients to really integrate all their data into the platform. Ideally, at some point when customers are going through assessments, maybe CMMC is an example, it really should make the job of the assessor really easy to be able to walk through and say, well, here's your answers, here's all the information you've got relative to your objective statements, and here's all of the evidence, whether that's screenshots or policy documents or whatever, in one location. Hopefully that can reduce some cost in terms of going through those assessments later too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're like in a lot of folks, when you first in the first year, it's a bit of an uplift, right? And a lot of these things are annual recurring or every couple of years, like ISO is every 2 years, even though you actually do an annual internal audit in between. And CMMC is in the same boat, where that's what is that, every 3 years for CMMC, and you still have to do an annual.
You do, yeah.
Yeah. So once you have that kind of level set, we have a couple automations that are already built in where you can just refresh the year. It'll pull in, what you have, and you can just kind of validate, is this the same, or here's what's new, which saves a lot of time. And then on the auditor side, we do have a built-in auditor workflow where the auditors can answer, be able to look through and put their own notes in, look through all that evidence by framework, or you can export it out in a big zip file that's organized by framework control, which then they can use in their third-party system, because some auditors just insist on doing it in their own system, which you have to work with if that's what CMMC is a good example. They will not use any third-party system. They want you to upload the data to them, and that's the requirement. So that's what we do.
Just do it.
Yeah, just do it.
So we're pretty well up against time. Anything? I think we covered everything. I think we talked about when we met to make sure that we wanted to get a few topics in. Dan, anything that you wanted to cover that maybe we haven't, or any key GRC things?
I think we touched on a lot of good stuff, but I'd love to hear, this is something I threw out there to you earlier, was the idea of MSPs sort of working together. How do we collaborate together and work together? Because, for instance, you guys are in a really good spot to be able to manage some of the cybersecurity and compliance needs, whereas other folks want to continue to be the boots on the ground, the on-prem tech, but they maybe don't want to tackle this. How would you envision that working together with yourselves and maybe some other MSPs?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we work with other MSPs that are in the day-to-day work supporting some of our customers. It's not as though we support the entirety of them in that complete way. It's a very unique question in the sense that it's somewhat set by the disposition of each organization. So there are plenty that are very happy to collaborate. They see it as a net benefit. It's a demonstrated value to a customer. I think that's the right framing. Some prefer to be the one tool to fix all problems, and those are more difficult discussions. But I think that the customer here sets the tone, and ultimately we support what all customers require. I think that's the emphasis and the projection that needs to be done in order to be very collaborative. The tools we're talking about support that type of thing. There's no barrier in that regard. It's just a matter of setting expectations and working together across organizations. And the bigger you are, the more of a base expectation that is.
Well, and I think I'll add to that a little bit. I think Vancord, we've made some real investments in standing up a security team in a set of security products. So I think we bring expertise, through we'll stay focused on, say, the assessment and sort of GRC space. We bring some real expertise with Steve's team to be able to help do the vendor risk assessments, to work with insurance to identify sort of best products for a particular company, to do the assessments and interpret questions that might be challenging for the client, or maybe challenging for other MSPs who don't have that same sort of security team behind it. So I think there's the challenge always is, how do you make sure that you're working with, in our case, say a competitor, but in a way that is really transparent and open, so that you're not stepping on each other's toes, so that we're delivering sort of the security value maybe, but then not looking in any way to disrupt a pre-existing relationship, and make sure that they're engaging with their client positively and in a way that sort of facilitates them growing in that relationship, right? So I think as long as you can maintain that openness and transparency, sort of with competing companies, because that's where we're at, I think it can work really well. It's just a matter of finding out what's the niche that each org brings and staying in your lane. And it's easy to say, it's not always easy to do, but I think you don't want to spend a lot of time necessarily overthinking that in sort of documentation and contracts. I think you really want to develop an actual working relationship to be able to have the conversations around, like, hey, we'll do the assessment, we'll hand you the report, you address the gaps, and we'll get out of your way. And I think that works really well from our experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been seeing that working well out there as well. And actually, as a mature framework, CMMC has the shared responsibility concept, which just kind of creates those lines for everybody to work together. So I would just love to see the community working together more. I think there's a lot of great knowledge out there, and that's what I would love to see over the coming couple of years, is more collaboration, everybody kind of being on the same team, not competing, but actually like, hey, we have our lane, let's work together. Let's
Steve and I our background is in higher ed originally, and that is the way higher ed works. I mean, you go to these conferences and everybody is sharing information, and everybody is, they're sharing information, they're sharing vendors. A lot of times you sort of end up with the similar approaches, even if they're not always the best approaches, but everybody's working together. In industry is a little more challenging to do that. And I think we always bring the perspective of, there's got to be a way to work together and make this ultimately easier for our customers, right? I mean, that's really the end game here. How do we find a way to do that? And I think if you do it, now the customer sees you as a partner, the industry sees you as a collaborator, and everybody wins, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Well, I think on that positive note, maybe we can find better ways to do it. But Dan, it's always fun. You run a regular webinar that we're part of, so we've had the opportunity to talk a whole bunch of times, even leading up to this. But it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. I'm really glad you're able to join today. I'm really glad to have ControlMap as a partner of ours, because we've gotten a lot of value for it. And I know we're looking forward to working with you more as the year goes on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and we'll look forward to working together in the coming new year here.
That sounds good. And, as always, if anybody has questions about, ControlMap, about how to deal with assessments and all the things we talked about, reach out to us. We're happy to have conversations. We can always bring, Dan into a conversation if need be, and we'll go from there. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.